Welcome to the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and today we're going to go over the top 36 running backs. There are more rankings. I have a total of 90 running backs ranked that you can check out up on the website, www.theffforge.com, and anything else that I reference can also be found up on the website. I will tell you about a couple of things before we get into this. Also, the link that's down in the description to the website will bring you directly to the running back rankings, which should be up when this video gets up. As I mentioned in my video about the quarterback rankings, there will be a different flavor to each of these rankings videos to some extent. And in this video, I will not be going through the tiers randomly, inserting guys into them. I will be going in order from number 1 to number 36 for my running backs. Also, you can see I have some tiers broken down, and I have some names here for the tiers, usage premium. I'll just kind of explain those names when I get to it, but really it just comes down to a level of confidence within a tier that I have, because I did try to get my tiers to be closely resembled to these numbers. And it just means that on average, these are the number of players that were quote-unquote better than, to simplify it, players in the next tier. There is a lot of analysis that went into that. You can find that analysis up on the website. There are also videos that I put up. Those were like the first videos that I did up on YouTube, and I recommend just going to the papers, but those are like 30 pages long. That said, there are abstracts kind of in the beginning that shorten it, but if you like numbers, if you like analysis and whatnot, I think they're interesting reads and put a lot of effort into them. So that's what these are based off of. One other thing, I will be referencing my equalized value, or EV, I will call it. And what that is I think it's a better measure of how these players have helped you in previous, so the EV that I mentioned would be where they ended up last season. And I used that instead of the average fantasy points per week. Not that there's anything wrong with average fantasy points per week. However, I prefer to have some amount of consistency on my rosters, and that's what equalized value does. That's why I called it that. Is it accounts for consistency a little bit more heavily than how much averages can be, thrown off by one huge game for a player or one terrible game even in the other way. So that is that. There do happen to be 36 players exactly in my first 5 tiers right now. Let's get started off with the running back number 1 in my rankings, which is going to be Christian McCaffrey up here in the S tier. And I have to say, I'm a little bit unsure of Christian McCaffrey at this point in time. I'm expecting Trey Lance to be the starting quarterback, and what puts Christian McCaffrey up in a tier like this on his own is not only his productivity and his efficiency, but also how involved he gets in the passing game. That's why we like some of the other guys who will be right in this tier as well. I think that Trey Lance hurts that passing as far as the amount of receptions, maybe 1 or 2 less targets even in a game overall. So I think I might bring the next 2 running backs in mine up into a tier with Christian McCaffrey and have them all 3 together, which brings in, I'll just bring these 2 together. It's going to be Saquon, Barkley, and of course Austin Ekeler in the second tier. And now this is obviously a projection, and I'm not afraid to go off of projections sometimes, because things just aren't the same from one year to the next, even though we do use history in order to project forward, because that's our best predictor. Things change, and so I've also accounted for some of those in my projections. As far as Saquon Barkley goes, he came up as my 3rd projected running back, have him ranked 2nd. And last year he was the EV running back number 6, whereas Austin Ekeler, in my projections, he came out as the running back 8, a little bit low, that feels like, and then EV, he was the running back number 1. I'm a little bit worried about Austin Ekeler in the sense of he's on the field less than Saquon Barkley for 1. The biggest thing here for me, for the argument for Austin Ekeler, is just the quarterback, the offense. That said, Austin Ekeler, I think, got a little bit of a boost last season from all the wide receivers, being out most of the year. Their number 1 and number 2 wide receiver barely ever were fully healthy. And then they brought in Quentin Johnston, wide receiver, highly drafted, and that could come in and just take a little bit of that edge off of Austin Ekeler's work. Also, last year, I mean, he only ran like 50% of the team's rushes. But even with that, I could see that going down just a little bit with Kellen Moore coming in. Might want more of a power rushing game to some extent, might have 2 running backs on the field more often. And so I worry about the floor, or yeah, I'm not so worried about the ceiling. I just worry about the floor a little bit with Austin Ekeler, whereas Saquon Barkley, he's just always going to be on the field. There's really no changes to the offense from last year as well, a little bit of security there. And so you up the touchdowns a little bit, and he could easily outperform how he did last year, which was plenty good as well. One other thing about my projections, when I reference them, my projections do not take touchdowns into account, and so that's where usually we might want to push the better team up ahead. And I'll debate this and maybe even flip these a couple of times before draft day. I just realized that I had Cam Akers. I was going to ask you, should I do this? Should I make that official? Let me know if you think I should put Christian McCaffrey on equal playing field, I guess, as like Austin Ekeler here in this tier, Saquon Barkley. I'll take your opinion into account if you let me know in the comments. Now let's move on to my running back 4, and this is going to be probably a surprise with Ramandre Stevenson. One more thing that I forgot to cover, I will go over, just like in previous videos, any avoid tags, sleeper tags, and ultimately, for the most part, any sleeper tag is going to be a guy who my projections had like 10 spots or so higher than their ADP at the time of doing this. And the avoid tags are for the opposite, when a guy of mine was projected quite lower than the average ADP. So as far as Ramandre Stevenson, obviously this is going to be a bit of a surprise. Finished last season, EV running back number 17. In my projections, he came up as the running back number 2. And so that's obviously part of the reason I have him so high. But I really find myself not being able to argue against the projections that I made for him. Jamir Harris is gone. He's going to have control of this backfield. I do expect that offense to be a little bit better than they were last season. He's a good receiving back as well. Like, if he's on the field most every down and gets most of the work here for New England, I think it could be a monstrous year for him. And so I'm going to project it like that. And let's move on to somebody who you probably think should be higher than him, Jonathan Taylor. This is my usage premium group. Out of this tier, these are the guys who I really have confidence in the workload that they should be receiving, and that just giving them some sort of high floor at the very least. That's what these guys are there for. And I can say that I feel confident in Jonathan Taylor's floor. I don't expect last season to happen again, where he was running back 21 according to EV, and even for my projections, he was the 16th ranked running back, so that's not great going against my projections by pushing him up, but I do expect him to have a better year. My main concern for him is how much better, because I don't really expect this offense to be better. Now, last year was like a worst case scenario for this offense. Is pretty pitiful a lot of the time. The numbers are almost certainly going to be better. I just don't know how much better the offense will be in all reality, how many more touchdowns they end up getting. And so I'm just a little bit concerned of the reality of him being a top 3 type of running back this season. After last season, it was kind of ugly. It's a team in the rebuild. Let's get on to the next running back here, and that is going to be Josh Jacobs. If you listened to my rankings last season, I had you on the right pace for him. I had him significantly higher than the average ranker, the average expert, or maybe even all experts. I had him pretty high. Had a lot of confidence in where he would end up at the end of the season. I think he outperformed that. The 4th, I didn't have him as my 4th ranked running back, that's for sure. But I thought that the potential of him being a top 5 running back, probably have that on video somewhere. I thought that was possible. So as far as Josh Jacobs goes, I don't expect him to be top 4. I don't expect as good of a year as last year. I think last year was kind of the ceiling, but I don't expect a whole lot worse of a year either. And so just pretty much having him ranked similarly to where he finished last season. And that'll bring us to my number 7 ranked running back in Nick Chubb. What is there to say? I mean, he could have a better season than he had last year even, and that was a pretty darn solid year. Very good running back. I don't know that anybody's going to disagree with where I have him ranked, so we'll just keep the Nick Chubb knowledge there, right? There's nothing else to say for him. And with that, we're going to start with Tony Pollard here, still in this usage premium tier, but we're kind of starting to get into the I have concerns territory with Pollard, but the upside is still too great that, and the amount of work that we can expect from him on a solid team leads me to keep him up here. Expect a good season from Pollard. We got a sneak peek of what a full backfield of Pollard could look like. Just have concerns about the durability of that over a season, but I'm willing to take the risk of him breaking down as time goes along. There's really nobody there that should threaten his workload too much. It would be a surprise if Malik Davis did. Which brings us to Mr. Steady Eddie here and Derrick Henry. I mean, the same story here. The reason that he's going to be starting to have some concerns is Tyjae Spears coming in. Might take off some of his floor work, his ceiling work. I think that they're going to try and get some formations with Tyjae, get Derrick Henry a little bit rested. I don't think that this offense is going to be great, so touchdowns might be a little tougher to come along, but he does have that base usage almost no matter what. It would be a surprise if Tyjae took enough work to leave him out of, number one running back territory at the end of the season. And then we have Bijan Robinson, who ADP is quite high on. I think he's number 4 in ADP. There he is, Bijan. And he's going to finish up this tier. He is my true swing one. Remember, this is actually still one tier in my rankings, but this is my swing vote for between there are concerns and usage premium, because my concerns for Bijan are his usage. I don't know that he's going to get the full usage treatment this season, or at least like early on. Maybe they work him in like Breece Hall, which at the end of the day, I had Breece Hall last season. That was perfectly fine. Just didn't put him out there like week 1 or 2 because, it's very high efficiency on a low amount of carries, and I had other guys I was able to use. But touchdowns might be hard to come by. How involved does he get in that passing game? 2 years ago, Cordero Patterson was very involved in the passing game. Last year, they really didn't use that element anymore. Are they going to do some of that with Bijan? Because I do think that they're going to still want Tyler Algier to get on the field. I thought that he showed enough last season to earn a certain amount of reps and get on the field. And I think that just eats away at a little bit of this usage premium that if you're grabbing Bijan Robinson at the RB4, you're obviously expecting him to have a huge amount of the workload. Between some concerns for the workload, concerns for this offense, and touchdowns, which is the main reason that I had concerns about like this offensive weapons last season. I don't know how much better that gets this year. Probably a little bit better at least. And so I guess I'm probably not going to end up getting Bijan Robinson this season with where I have him ranked. And that's going to bring us to Breece Hall here, my running back 11. In my there are concerns tier, and I think it's pretty easy for Breece Hall. It's the injury concern. For instance, if Javonte Williams wasn't coming off of injury, he'd be a full 12 spots or more higher than where I currently have him ranked. And his projection is really good. We'll get to that. There's just too many concerns coming off these ACL injuries, and I think we're taking that into account with Javonte Williams because his ADP, where I have him ranked, definitely would suggest that in my opinion. It's why I have him ranked where I have him. But Breece Hall, this is only like 5-6 spots, 5 spots lower than my projections for him. I would have probably have him ranked 4th if it wasn't for his injury, if he was, continued on the path that he started with last season. So this is significantly lower. I still think it's probably a little bit too high, and I will probably be moving him back. The thing about waiting on news is in the offseason, all the news is probably going to be good regardless. At this point in the draft, I'm just have a do not draft tag on him mentally. If he drops somewhere behind like where I have Najee Harris ranked, so I think around running back 15, I would feel a little bit more comfortable with it. And then I might push him back as far as running back 20 when all is said and done. That's where I would for sure be willing to take the risk on him. And that's going to bring us to what could potentially be this year's Breece Hall in Jamir Gibbs. He's going to have an opportunity based on where they drafted him in Detroit to do great things, just like Bijan Robinson with where he was drafted. In both cases, I expect these guys to get, the majority of the workload, to be the lead running backs for their teams. Not expecting that to be David Montgomery. And I think Jamir Gibbs has a very good chance he has running back 1 upside. What is he? My running back 12. So I'm willing to take a little bit of a risk on the rookie. Really loved him in the draft season. And that's going to bring us to Aaron Jones. I don't think there's a whole lot to talk about here. Aaron Jones, EV number 16 last season. There are some concerns to the usage here and to the quarterback and how good of an offense this may or may not be. I think we're drafting Aaron Jones about as highly as he should go. And I'm actually going to move him back 1 spot. So I'm actually going to bring Najee and put him 1 spot higher. I keep debating this back and forth, but I think my mind has been made here because Najee doesn't have A.J. Dillon, where A.J. Dillon's going to be in the top 36 here. Najee doesn't have that. Jaylen Warren's a little bit further back. I could see a world with the new quarterback in Green Bay, Jordan Love, where they might want A.J. Dillon out there a little bit more. They might want that steady Eddie pounding running back out there, and Aaron Jones could become a change of pace guy again for the second time in his career. That's possible. That's not happening to Najee Harris. And I expect for Najee Harris that offense to improve a little bit from last season, but just like Green Bay's offense, how good is it? I don't know. So touchdown upside, not the greatest with these guys, and that's why we have Jamir Gibbs up ahead of him. I think the touchdown, usage might be a little bit less, at least than Najee Harris, but touchdown upside, efficiency even, could very well be better. And that's going to bring us to the last guy in this third tier of mine. That's Kenneth Walker. He's going to finish this up as my running back 15, so that's about how many running backs we want in our first 3 tiers. The concern for him is Zach Charbonnet. There's a legitimate threat to some of his work. I wasn't a big believer in Zach Charbonnet pre-draft. Definitely had him lower than a lot of people, but he got drafted around where most people had him. I obviously have to put aside my pre-draft expectations of who Zach Charbonnet is to a certain point. I don't think he's going to become the starting running back there or anything like that. He could be good enough to eat into Kenny Walker's workload a little bit. And given this next guy's ADP, you're probably wondering, where is he? And that's going to be Travis Etienne here. Starting off my next tier, ADP 10, that feels a little bit rich for me for Travis Etienne. This next tier here, we're going to go, it's a base confidence level. They don't have this usage premium, but once again, we're hitting a level of confidence. We're not really shooting for upside, or we don't have concerns anymore so much as I feel good that they're going to finish as, for instance, for him, a high-end number 2 running back. The biggest issue I have with Etienne in regards to having him lower than ADP is I do really like this offense quite a bit, but it is a pass-first offense. And we saw a full season from Etienne last year, and he was ranked 25th via the average fantasy points per week, 26th via my EV system. Why do we expect such a huge jump from a borderline RB3 last season? I don't have any arguments to expect him to be that much better than he was last year. A couple more touchdowns and this and that, but there's no reason to really suspect some sort of big increase in workload for me. My projections had Etienne at running back 23, so running back 15 is pretty much my ceiling on him. That's about as early as I want to be drafting Travis Etienne, personally. And that's going to bring us to another really controversial one in Chase Brown. By the way, Travis Etienne, I have a do not draft tag or an avoid tag on Travis Etienne because it did have him significantly, his ranking significantly lower than where he is projected, 23 compared to 10 for the ADP. And Breece Hall have an injury flag on. No other flags this high up. And Chase Brown, though, going to get a sleeper tag on his butt. If you're not aware, he is the backup to Joe Mixon currently in Cincinnati. And obviously, I projected him as the starter in Cincinnati. I think there's a good shot that he will be the starter. I really like Chase Brown coming out of college in this draft season. Was very, very high up on him, so I have high hopes. And to me, this feels like Dameon Pierce, but a much even bolder call than that, because I felt like I was taking crazy pills in the offseason, early offseason at least, last year, I was sitting there saying, obviously, Dameon Pierce is going to be the starter for them and projecting him like that. And draft community just wasn't projecting him like he was the starter. Like, he had nobody in front of him. We got Joe Mixon in front of Chase Brown, so this isn't as easy of a projection. But I think Joe Mixon gets cut, gets suspended, maybe outright gets outplayed in training camp by Chase Brown. That's the one where my patience is really going to be tested with my ranking, because that's probably the one that will take I'd say the closest up until draft day or anything to actually know if that is the case. That's how I have it ranked. You don't have to draft Chase Brown this high. You barely have to draft him before the last round of the draft. You can get him pretty darn late, and I highly suggest it, because I think there's too many concerns for Joe Mixon to ignore. And that's going to bring us to a mainstay here in Dalvin Cook. Crashing into the Dalvin Cook party here, because I don't see a reason to totally refilm this video. I'm currently going to be putting Alexander Mattison, I believe, and as a direct replacement here into Dalvin Cook's spot, because I did have Dalvin Cook pushed backwards a little bit, anticipating him getting cut. Talked about that in the original cut, talking about Dalvin Cook, but that will be cut out of this video now. Dalvin Cook going to be booted out of the top 36 almost certainly for in the short term, but I'm pretty sure wherever he ends up going, he's going to be a part of a split backfield, so going to be a little bit tough to get him. I mean, A.J. Dillon makes it in here. It's possible he'll get into a top 36. We'll see where he goes. There are definitely some enticing destinations that are possible, as far as, you know, as enticing as a split backfield could be. So we'll determine where he ends up. The big thing here is, so I filmed a video, released it immediately, about the Dalvin Cook being cut. Technically, he hasn't been cut yet. And since then, it's been a few hours. And there's one issue that I have with Alexander Mattison and Dwayne McBride, who are my two favorites to be the lead back for this team. But neither one of them are really system fits. That was my big issue. That's why I downgraded Dalvin Cook last year. That's why, once again, he wasn't going to be a top 6, 7 kind of guy this year for me in that system. But they do have a running back, Ty Chandler, second-year running back, who fits their system the best out of those 3 running backs. So I think there's a chance that he could emerge as the starting running back, or, I mean, at the very least, the third down kind of guy, some sort of split backfield here between him and one of Alexander Mattison and or Dwayne McBride. And so the more I think about that, the more I may move Alexander Mattison back more. But as of right now, I'm projecting Alexander Mattison to roughly be my running back 19 as far as my rankings go. I'm just going to keep my eyes and ears really closely on that backfield this offseason, especially in regards to Ty Chandler and what that possibility looks like. The only thing I would say is last year's rookie season, he really didn't get much work. He played in 3 games. I think he had 6 rushes. I don't believe there was any kind of injury for him, and he wasn't a my guy or anything like that coming into the draft last year. Back to your regularly scheduled video. Next up, I'm going to put 3 running backs up on here. I'm going to get you DeAndre Swift, Miles Sanders, and J.K. Dobbins. So I'm thinking of pushing J.K. Dobbins up ahead of both of these running backs. This is how I currently have them ranked. Let me know what you think of that move. Should I put him up ahead of Miles Sanders and or DeAndre Swift? I have concerns about all 3 of these guys, a certain amount of confidence in all of them. So DeAndre Swift could be a little bit touchdown reliant, because there's going to be a certain amount of reliance on efficiency, which he should be highly efficient in this offense as well. And of course, there's the injury concerns. But workload-wise, I don't know how high of a workload he'll end up having in Philadelphia. So once again, might be a little bit touchdown reliant to have those big weeks, which I would prefer to not have a guy who's touchdown reliant. then Miles Sanders is going to get a good workload, but we're banking on a rookie quarterback being at least half decent in order for him to have a better than running back 2, mid running back 2, high running back 3 even this season, because the touchdowns are going to be hard to come by for him. Whereas J.K. Dobbins got concerns about there's a new offense coming in. It's going to be more pass heavy, so I think his workload goes down. Just like DeAndre Swift, of course, do have a rushing quarterback, which helps the efficiency for the running backs, but also takes away from the overall workload a little bit. But he's coming back from injury, 2 years removed. I think this offense is going to be very good as well. So my projections for J.K. Dobbins are at running back 32, and that's because I do have Gus Edwards doing a fair amount of heavy lifting there. But I moved him up. Should I move him up more or not? I don't know. I'm excited for J.K. Dobbins this season. I'm also concerned about the upside. But that's kind of where we are at this point in the running backs. Which brings us to James Conner, who I have up next here in my rankings. And I got a sleeper tag on him. It's not one that I absolutely love. That's why he's a little further back in my rankings than my projections, because he came out in 7th in my projections. Last season, he was the EV ranked running back number 10. So don't forget about that. He did have a good year last season, of course. This is a different Cardinals offense, a different team than last season, for probably not better this coming up year. I'm not expecting him to be a top 10 running back, but I do expect him to get a good workload and be more involved in this passing attack than he was previously. When it comes to his usage, I have little concern that he could be a high-end running back 2 with a high floor and a low ceiling. And that's going to bring us to another running back where I have some mixed feelings on him. Rachaad White's going to be on a less efficient, maybe not even efficient is the right word, an offense that's going to run fewer plays, a slightly scary offense much like Arizona. Is a very good running back. He was one of my favorite running backs coming out of the draft last season. I just don't love the situation, but similar to James Conner, and probably a better offensive line than James Conner. So he could jump James Conner at any point. At the same time, James Conner is like the second best weapon on this offense, whereas Rachaad White's not quite there with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin being there. And so with that, we're seeing my base level of confidence start to wane as we get to the end of this tier. And I think I had 2 more guys in this tier. I'm going to do a switch up here. I'm going to move Dameon Pierce up 1 spot in my rankings. He's going to come up next. And, I'm expecting him to have some sort of similar season to last season. Good rusher. He was another guy, one of my favorite running backs in the draft class. I liked a lot of running backs last season. But he doesn't have the receiving upside of either of these guys. And yes, they have the best quarterback for the future out of like the 3 that are going to be starting the season for these teams. But for right now, don't know how much better that offense is going to be touchdown-wise. And also, just as far as last season, he got like 20, 22, 24 rushes a game for at least a stretch there. I don't really expect that. New offensive coordinator in there, new regime in general, and they're going to be less focused on the rushing attack. They're going to be more focused on developing their passer. And so, 16, 18, 20 rushes a game. Editor Steve jumping in here, 16, 18, 20 rushes a game. Even that sounds rich to me because I kind of forgot at this point in the recording to talk about Devin Singletary, who I think is a legitimate threat to a certain amount of work for Dameon Pierce. So just wanted to bring that up. That is some extra concern that I have for Dameon Pierce, and where we could see some fluctuations with my ranking with him based on news that comes out this offseason. Which brings us to the guy who just got jumped, and that's going to be David Montgomery. You're going to put him down here in the less confident category. And it's very close, but I don't really have a base level of confidence, so it's kind of semantics here. Remember, this is still just one tier that I have all these guys in, which means that they all could compete with each other very easily in my mind on a week-in and week-out basis. But David Montgomery, I really don't know how to feel about him. I think that he takes over the Jamal Williams role to a lesser extent as far as overall usage, because Jamal Williams got used quite a bit because they didn't DeAndre Swift was either injured or they just didn't like him a whole lot. I think David Montgomery will be used just like Jamal Williams was along the goal line. And so that hurts. That's a part of the thing that hurts Jamir Gibbs a little bit for me. But for David Montgomery, that makes him very touchdown reliant. Spoke earlier on someone, like I don't love to have a touchdown reliant guy like Jamal Williams that never feels good. But we did just see Jamal Williams get 17 rushing touchdowns last season. And David Montgomery's a better receiver than Jamal Williams too. It's there, it's possible, so it's tough to ignore that, which keeps him in this tier, even though I do think he's the second running back on this team. And now we're fully submerged in this less confident portion of this tier as we get to Alvin Kamara, who I think it's pretty clear why I'm not too confident on him. Is he even going to be the starter this season? He very well could face a suspension, so that's a big concern for him. But he did do quite well in my projections. He was the number 17 projected running back last season, EV 23, and that was really because he just didn't get any touchdowns. He had a good floor, but he had like no ceiling. And so I wouldn't expect such a touchdown-starved season to happen a second time. So, if he doesn't get suspended, he's going to be one heck of a deal at this point in the draft. So can't leave him out of this tier because he's easily in with this group of guys if you remove the whole suspension concern. And that's going to bring up Isaiah Pacheco next. Can't ignore him. Going to be in a really good offense. Second year here. Late round running back who a lot of people liked. I liked him. He was a my guy in the draft. Didn't love him, but I liked him enough for him to be a my guy because there were some unique traits about him that we saw come out and really be effective last year for Kansas City. But there's still a passing first offense. Never going to get enough work to be super reliant, and touchdowns are a little bit hard to come by usually for running backs there, and Jerick McKinnon tends to steal away some of those receiving options, but there is some upside to him as well. Just, a little less confident in him than I am some of these other guys. And then we have James Cook, and this is not the running back James Cook, although that is obviously who I would draft. I wouldn't draft. I think this is a British scholar or explorer. And if you search James Cook up in Google, this guy comes up at a 50-to-1 ratio compared to running back James Cook. As far as James Cook, just less confident in him because, well, they brought Damian Williams in. So definitely concerned about that to impact to his workload. Additionally, even the drafting of Dalton Kincaid, I think eats into a little bit of that hopeful receiving extra work that we could have expected from him, but he's still the starter on a very good offense, so I have a certain amount of baseline confidence, just less confident than the rest. And that's going to bring us to Jamal Williams, who, probably comes back, get the workload, but efficiency could be pretty terrible, might share the backfield a little bit more than we would want. Unfortunate, but we're going to be cautious with him, and with that injury, there aren't a lot of running backs who come back. Players really who come back from these ACL injuries and are what they were prior to the injury for that first year. So we're going to heed that warning. And that's going to bring us to the last tier here, the I have questions but tier. And we're going to start this tier off with A.J. Dillon. And I have questions, but what if Aaron Jones goes down? That's the big upside for A.J. Dillon. It's that he could get a lot of work if Aaron Jones goes down at any point, and he should be somewhat flex viable. Otherwise, like I mentioned with Aaron Jones, there's even potential for him to be the guy who gets more of a workload this season, I think. And that's going to bring us to a sleeper, which, by the way, Javonte Williams, I do still have a sleeper tag on him because he projected running back 14 or something about like that. Yeah, running back 14 in my projections, but just not really quite expecting that to actually come through. But here's a running back who I really get excited about at this point in the draft, and that is Devon Achane. One of my favorite running backs in the draft, had him very highly ranked, have high hopes for Devon Achane, and I have questions for him, but what if he gets over half of the backfield work? I think that would be enough for a guy like him in an offense like that to be highly explosive and scary. There's just a couple of objects in the way of that happening. Next up, we have Jamal Williams, and I have questions, but what if Alvin Kamara gets suspended? And Jamal Williams be the lead running back there? Could be pretty valuable in this area of the draft. And up next, we're going to have another sleeper of mine, Antonio Gibson. And let me just go into... So just a heads up, as far as my projections went for Devon A-Chain, I had him projected as my running back 31. So I think that's right about where I have him ranked here, right? 36, right about so. And Antonio Gibson also did quite well in my rankings, very well. He came up as my running back 27, so higher than somebody else you'll see on the same team that most people don't have ranked higher. So yes, of course, I do have questions about Antonio Gibson and my ranking of him, but what if the new regime does what I expect them to do and utilizes Antonio Gibson in the receiving game a lot? Could be a good running back then, huh? And that's going to be followed up with a guy who I have an avoid tag on in Cam Akers. My projections on him, he's projected 33rd on my running backs list, so that's quite a bit lower than ADP, which I believe is all the way up at running back 23. So 10 spots, exact difference there, so just makes it into my avoid list. And I do have questions, but what if he isn't the lead? This is my question for him, really. What if he isn't the lead running back and or this offense sucks again? Kyren Williams, an undrafted free agent. Zach Evans will have an opportunity to compete for that starting running back position. I am absolutely sure he is not a lock to be the starting running back. I don't really want to draft that at pick 23. My pre-draft rankings for Zach Evans basically had him at the tail end of the running backs who I thought could come in and be a difference maker, be starting running backs or at least like really good and effective running backs for a team in year one and beyond. So Zach Evans has that potential in him. I'm not the only person who thinks that. They got him as an undrafted free agent for potentially for several reasons. But now he's on a team, and he's on a team who I don't think is locked down at who their starting running back is. So there's an opportunity there. And I really didn't love Kyren Williams in the pre-draft process last season. Have Zach Evans definitely higher up on my board than I had Kyren Williams last year. I'm sorry, I screwed up on my running backs. So Antonio Gibson there, and that's going to bring up Bijan Robinson then after Cam Akers. Given my thoughts on Antonio Gibson's usage for fantasy purposes, I'm not very excited about Bijan Robinson. Even if I'm wrong on Antonio Gibson, I'm not very excited about Bijan Robinson. But he could be very good. I would say his ceiling is something like what Dameon Pierce gave his team, gave fantasy owners last year, which I'd say is a guy who you're not confident in week in and week out, but he ends up, if he's very good, he ends up pulling it out for you at the end of the day and being a pretty good running back. And that means we're going to finish this off with Joe Mixon. And I have questions, but what if he isn't suspended, cut, or outplayed by a running back who I think is really good in Chase Brown, my running back for pre-draft, and he remains the starter for the Cincinnati Bengals, a really good team, one of the best offenses in the league? Then I will be way, way, way wrong on him, having him at RB36. Once again, as far as he and Chase Brown goes, that gap will close and could overlap the closer and closer we get to draft day, but I'm going to do my best to go down with the ship here for Chase Brown. I got a feeling. All right, that is it for my running backs. Wide receivers are left to go. If you haven't seen tight ends, quarterbacks videos, check those on out. If you like the video, if you're still here, like, comment, subscribe, do one, do all, do two of three. Your call. I rhyme. That's the end.